Welcome to After Hours. I'm Liz Smith, and I have another exciting automotive story. We're going to be talking to Murray Jones, and he has put together an organization for Langley Speedway. It's Langley Speedway Historical Society. And what he's here is to talk about Langley Speedway, why it's closed down, and how the automotive industry does an impact with us as Canadians, and we're losing our racetracks and our racing and places to do it. And Murray has put together a society to help preserve this beautiful site that from the 70s and 80s raced is no longer available for drivers, and it's a really sad thing. I'd like to welcome Murray Jones to talk about this. Murray, tell us from the beginning, Murray, what Langley Speedway is about, saving it as a historical site, society, and why you got involved with it. Let's just start with what it's about.
Well, really, if you go back to the beginning, it starts with the motorsports industry here in BC. At one time was actually extremely strong. There were racetracks in Canada, British Columbia, as early as the late 1910s, 1920s. There were a lot of tracks around, and of course, because it was such a big deal to so many people back in those days when cars first were introduced to this part of the country, and of course, like the old adage goes, as soon as there were two cars on the road, there was a race. But there were a lot of tracks. There's some actually still here. False Creek Speedway still exists. It's down just off, I believe it's First Avenue in Vancouver, and it's part of a park down there. And apparently it was repaved at one time so that the people could walk around it with comfort. And there's still a small piece of the Haney Speedway in the fairgrounds in Maple Ridge. But Langley Speedway was it was the last operating motorsports facility in the lower mainland proper, as Metro Vancouver is known. Of course, Mission Raceway still operates, but it's just strictly a drag strip and a sort of a makeshift road course. But as far as being in the lower mainland, Langley Speedway was the last operating facility for oval track racing.
And when you say oval track racing, can you be specific to the viewers in what type of car that actually gets raced at Langley Speedway for oval racing?
Yeah, when they first started out, they ran what they called the early lates, which would have been 1930s coupes. Basically, guys would rip the fenders off and then go racing. And then, of course, through the evolution of the motorsports and the cars, they'd race 57 Chevys and Fords. And then right up through the 70s and the early 80s, they'd race the big Chevelles and that type of thing. Full-bodied stock cars, mostly. There were the occasional races with open-wheel cars like the midgets and the sprint cars. Not so much sprint cars, but midget cars would come. And they even had the occasional mini stock races with the little Austin Minis and the little tiny Datsuns and stuff that were becoming popular throughout the time when they were around. But for the most part, it was big stock cars that were racing.
Stock cars. And any NASCAR racers or anything like that, like we see in the States, and where we see it's predominantly an American sport. It's sort of died off as a Canadian event. And do you think it's a family event? Do you feel that the automotive sportsmanship on the Langley Speedway is made it harder for, like, it's not there, it was for family people? It wasn't just for guys drinking and driving crazy, was it?
No, there was, it still is. Motorsports is a huge family event competition. There's probably no other sport that I know of where a man can have his son and his grandson competing on the same sport field at the same time, and they all have the same opportunity to win.
And women too, of course.
Against each other. And women, of course, absolutely. And then a big part of that is, with the cars being either damaged or not running properly or not handling properly, when they went home at the end of the day, race day, there was usually a lot of work that went into the cars during the week, so that was time spent with your family as well. The husbands and wives would get together and do whatever was necessary to get the cars going. The kids would be there, the aunts and uncles would all share time, and then of course the spectator aspect of it. Langley Speedway at one time hosted an event where they counted 10,000 people in the grandstands, and that was not including the kids that got in for free. So there had to be at least 12,000 people in the grandstand.
So it was a lot of following.
It was huge.
So what dropped it away? What stopped it from, first of all, who closed it down and why?
Well, Metro Vancouver bought the property from the man who first built it. Craig Fraser was a pharmacist here in Surrey, and he first opened the Speedway. I believe he started building it in 1961, because I've been told, and I think I've even seen one or two photographs where they were testing the track after it was first not even paved, when it was still just the dirt banking, and they were testing the track in 62, and then I believe they paved it in 62, and there may have been one or two races on the pavement, and then in 63 they had quite a bit of racing there, 64 again, and then in 1965 they actually did the grand opening. They had Noel Booth, one of the township councillors, come down and cut the ribbons. And then after 69, in 1969, Craig Fraser sold the property to the GVRD, the Vancouver Regional District it was known at that time, I believe. And then they took the original lease back to Craig Fraser was for 10 years with an option to renew for another 10. But Craig Fraser, I guess, just didn't want to continue working with the track and such, and so he sold the lease to a guy named Gord Hemrick, who was famous in this region as far as stock car drivers go. He won so many races at Langley Speedway and abroad. And he operated it as Langley Speedway for the next 3 years through the end of the term of the lease. And then for whatever reason, whether he was decided not to renew the lease on the 10-year option that he had available to him or not, I'm not sure. But after that, it was put down to a year-to-year lease. So every year, the lease on the track came up for renewal. And that meant anybody could come to the Metro Vancouver board and say, well, we want the lease. And there was a lot of infighting that started happening over the argument on who was going to run the track, who was going to get the lease. Guys were saying, you know, I can run it better than you can. We're going to go after it. They'd
individual people would do it?
There
or
were
would be organizations as well trying to
private organizations, clubs. Lamora is one that the Lower Mainland Oval Racing Association was one of the groups, and I guess they were like the last sort of big sanctioning body here in Lower Mainland that was operating the track for a period of time.